Hi there, Titans, and welcome back to another Titan Academy video. Today we'll be talking about action flows in Titan Web. I'll be showing you a quick example of some conditional logic and logic that was set up using action flows, and then I'll show you how we set it all up. Let's get started. So first, just to demo out kind of how this form works, it's a simple update us form. You can update your personal details. This message that you see on load, this is popping up because we do not recognize the contact who is trying to access this form. And that is because we have not populated our URL with their ID. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now we've added an encrypted ID and we're able to pre-populate our form. This data is coming directly from Salesforce, and this logic was all built using action flows. We also have some conditional show hide logic over here. Again, built this using our action flows. And we have a submit button that will push this data to Salesforce and update this contact. And again, everything that's happening on this button, when I click it, asking me if I really do want to submit, confirming, pushing to Salesforce, and adding a thank you message, all of this is configured in my action flow. And the final thing, perhaps to show, if we refresh over here, we can see all of our updated data. Here you got some of the details that we just updated and pushed to Salesforce. And we also have here an ID that's related to this contact. If I actually delete this file in Salesforce, and now we're going to return to our form, you'll also see that we're conditionally showing or hiding this upload your ID field, depending on whether they already have an ID related to this contact in Salesforce. And so everything that we just saw can be built using our action flows. So let's take a look at the builder and see how that was set up. So the first place I want to go is to my page, and I'm going to click on the three dots over here, and I'll just show you some of the logic that we set up on the page level here. So for those of you who are not familiar, we have our first time and every time actions. Those are actions that will run either the first time that I visit this page or every time that I visit this page. And I've set up some actions, a simple condition, followed by a Salesforce get. And if this condition is not met, I show that message that we saw in the beginning. I can also write some conditions on the page level, and these are conditions that will be evaluated anytime that the element or variable that is sitting in our condition is changed or updated. So if this variable is touched in any way, it will reevaluate this condition and run the subsequent actions, in this case, either showing or hiding that file uploader for the ID. Let's take a look at how to build an action flow and some best practices of how this can be done. So first of all, we have a number of different element types, and you can see all the different ways that you can configure an action flow by clicking on this pink plus over here. And this will open up the node screen where I can add all sorts of different actions, conditions, and different nodes in general that I want to trigger during my action flow. We have some of our popular options, of course, such as our Salesforce actions, pushes and gets to Salesforce, affected elements, being able to affect different elements on our project, redirecting to different internal or external pages, showing messages, and many more different actions. For example, triggering certain interactivity on specific element types here. We have different user interactions like sending emails and generating documents. Layout actions like we discussed, showing messages, opening up modals and drawers, those Salesforce actions that we talked about, system actions such as triggering JavaScript or posting a message to a parent site that you might be embedded in, or triggering a loop action as well. And so we have all of these options. Now, the way that the action flow works is that you're able to follow different paths throughout your flow. So for example, in this action flow, we can see that we're kicking off with a condition to evaluate a certain parameter. And if this parameter is not empty, then we trigger a Salesforce action. We can, of course, continue this flow and add actions to happen afterwards, such as a message or any other action that will happen either after finish, during integration, on cancel. And so you can build an entire sequence of events that will happen once your action flow is triggered. All right, let's talk about some best practices related to action flows. One thing I wanted to mention is naming everything in your action flow. So let's start with naming the rule itself. We can name our rules, and this is really, really important. So for example, in this rule, we'll say opening rule for page load, and we can of course give it a specific name and have naming conventions of how we name our different action flows based on how you'd like to work. But that will rename my rule and make it a lot easier to keep track of what my different rules are doing. So that if I were to create a new rule, I would be able to easily understand if I had many, many rules here, and they're just named rule 2, 3, and 4, it would be very complicated for me to understand what each of these rules actually do. So first of all, important to name your rules. The next thing that's really important is naming the elements in your rules, or the nodes in your rules. So for example, here, I've explained exactly what this Salesforce action is doing. I know that I'm doing some kind of Salesforce action, but it's important for me to give it a tag so I know exactly what this Salesforce action is doing. So in this case, populate form data from contact. You can, of course, make these shorter and just say populate form. Whatever is going to make it clear to you and to the others working on this project what actually is happening in this flow. All right, a couple more options that we have here. We can clone rules just like that. We can delete rules by clicking on the trash can. We can turn rules on and off, and when they're off, they will of course not be able to run. And we can of course zoom in and out of our action flow so that if we have a very complex flow, we can find exactly what we're looking for, and we can use this map on the right to understand where each thing is in our flow. And the last thing I want to show you here is the ability to save our rules to a library. And we can talk a little bit more about libraries in a future video, but if I want to access this rule in multiple places throughout my project, it might make sense to save this to my library so that I can, instead of rebuilding this rule each time, I can just grab it from the library. Now that's important. We need to have a finish node if we want to save it to our library. And we'll go ahead and just connect this as well to our finish node, and I'll save this, and we'll call this, we'll just say opening rule. Okay, and now I've saved this to my library. If I want to go inside it and edit it, I can. And I can also create actions that happen while this library is running or after it's finished running, once it hits that finish node. All right, I'm going to go ahead and apply. The other places that I can create an action flow can be on any element that I want to write a condition on. So for example, in this element, based on the answer to this question of if my user is over 18, I want to show or hide this birthday field. And so if I head over to the conditions of this field, I can see that I have a condition that's named, of course, and I have my condition here with my actions that run based on this field. I can, of course, have multiple rules for each field if I'd like. Now, the final place that we can do action flows are on any element that supports on-click actions. For example, a button, and there are also multiple different actions that can do on-click. We can take a text element and have an on-click action here as well. But in our case, we're just going to be looking at the button. I'm going to take this shortcut for my on-click action over here, and we can see the entire action flow that happens once we submit our form. We run a validation. After the validation, if it's valid, we ask them if they really do want to submit, and if they do, we push the data to Salesforce and then show them a thank you message. If it's invalid, we show them an error message. Again, this entire action flow can be built as a condition, or it can be built simply just by clicking on a button like this, and this will trigger our submit. Last thing I want to show is earlier we made our action flow library. If you ever want to access these action flows, you can look in the action flow library here by clicking on the gear icon. You can, of course, edit these and create new rules straight from here. And we can also create action flows on project level conditions. We've talked in other videos the differences between page actions and project actions, but if you need a condition or an action flow to run on the project level, you can write these here under custom variables for the entire project. And these will be evaluated regardless of what page you're on.